afternoon, and thank you for gathering. Hadn't realized this was the last slot of the day. Appreciate you guys all turning out. So yeah, my name's Charlie Moore. I run carbon and sustainability solutions at Chainlink Labs. I'm delighted to have Alasdair and Gemma join us today from IATA and the World Bank, who both play really central roles in the carbon markets. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, as I won't do justice to the significance of their organizations and their roles. But suffice to say, they've been at the forefront of moving this market forward recently, and I'm looking forward to the conversation, talking through some of the exciting things that they're working on. So perhaps, Gemma, do you want to go first and introduce yourself and your role at the World Bank?
Sure, thank you, Charlie. My name is Gemma Torras, and I'm an IT specialist working at the Climate Change, Finance and Economics unit at the World Bank. Nice to be here today.
Hi, and I'm Alasdair. I'm Director of Digital Climate Markets at IATA, which is the industry body for carbon markets. And so I'm focused on digital innovation, looking at how blockchain can be deployed to accelerate growth in carbon markets and also digital MRV and a variety of other technologies that are emerging in the space.
Excellent. As I say, thank you for joining us today. So I suspect many of you were at the last panel that we just had around the digital MRV, the measurement, reporting, verification in this space, where we had some great speakers talking about innovative work on putting a lot of the new satellite and sensor data on chain, and some of the use cases and benefits involved with that. Related to that, we're going to talk today about what these guys have been doing with an initiative known as the Climate Warehouse. And I'll let Gemma initially sort of walk you through the Climate Warehouse, what pain points and needs it's seeking to address, and where it's at. So, Gemma?
Sure, thank you. So maybe before explaining what the Climate Warehouse is, going back to Charlie's question, what are the challenges that this infrastructure is aiming to address? So as many of you know, the Paris Agreement set up a bottom-up approach, giving countries the flexibility to choose how they want to achieve the climate goals. So they can choose between different decentralized cooperative approaches. And so this bottom-up approach also brings some complexity and more diversity in verification and reporting mechanisms, which increases the fragmentation in the market. And actually, the private sector task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets that was led by the UN Special Envoy, Mark Carney, they mapped the emerging challenges in the scale-up process of the markets across the value chain. And they saw, for example, at the supply chain, that there were double claims, double counting of carbon credits. Also, they surveyed buyers and sellers, and they were reflecting their uncertainty with so many standards, certifications, different formats of data. Then they look at the demand side, and they saw there was a unclear link with the nationally determined contributions. There was not enough visibility of the pricing, the rating information, also not enough visibility of the project life cycle. And if we look at the market mechanisms in place, we don't have centralized databases that include both voluntary and compliance markets data. So in this increased fragmentation in the scale-up process of voluntary carbon markets, the World Bank launched the Climate Warehouse with the vision to become a public good infrastructure that would be building more trust, enhancing transparency and integrity in the carbon markets. And this infrastructure is, in a way, an aggregating force in the ecosystem, which helps the reporting compliance, it helps to identify double counting, and it connects through blockchain technology a peer-to-peer connection across decentralized registries with the aim to link, aggregate, and harmonize the underlying data to ensure transparent accounting of Article 6. So that's the full vision of the warehouse. I'm happy to discuss more on the technical level and the granularity of it, but back to you, Charlie.
Sure. So perhaps you could just put some color for the audience around the sort of some of those integrity issues around the double counting and double claiming, and what we actually mean in the context of carbon credits.
Some double counting?
Yeah.
So, for instance, we have seen in the value chain that at the supply side, many were arguing that some carbon credits may be double counted or double claimed. So this metadata infrastructure, by providing a more harmonized data from all the registries, is aiming to have all this data publicly available, surfacing in the climate warehouse. So then private sector and other service providers can come in, leverage this data, and provide services on due diligence checks, as well as conflict identification. So it's enabling data that is harmonized in the space, so then the service layer can come in and address this double counting issue.
Anything you want to add to that, Alasdair?
So maybe what I meant to say is that as we move to this Article 6 world, where every country has its own nationally determined contribution, and we're seeing a number of countries launching their own national registries, it becomes increasingly vital to track what goes on both in the voluntary space, so from major independent standards, and at a national level, and making sure that projects aren't counted twice on kind of a compliance at a national level versus...
Right. So you've obviously, the World Bank has been looking at this specific issue for some time. The Climate Warehouse is now, a couple of years in. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about where it's at on the journey in terms of the evolution and rollout.
So this infrastructure, the World Bank started prototyping, testing, and simulating this infrastructure in 2019. And these testing and simulation activities had the aim to work with our partnering governments and organizations to jointly learn about supporting technologies and also integration of registry systems, and at the same time co-create, design the architecture and the data model that would be in this infrastructure. So we had 3 simulations, and in each simulation we would be testing with a number of participants, including national governments, standard agencies, and other broader market participants, and we would be testing the user interface, the installation. We would also be testing the data model and validating the granularity of the taxonomy that the warehouse would be using. And so this last year, we completed the final testing phase. It started in March, and it completed a few weeks ago. We tested with 30 participating organizations, including 11 national governments, such as the UK, Sweden, Switzerland, Peru, Chile, Rwanda, Senegal, and we also had independent standard agencies like Vera Gold Standard, ACR and CAR, and GCC, and broader participants like UNFCCC providing feedback as an observer. And so we had 75 participants across 55 testing sessions and many other weekly office hours where we were validating the granularity and leveraging our convening role to put everyone together in one room and ask about what they think about the taxonomy and the architecture and the capacity that they have. And so we completed the testing in August, and right now this infrastructure as a public good will be transferred to a new independent entity that will be anchored in Singapore, and maybe Alasdair can talk more about this. But basically, at the World Bank, within our scope of work, we do test, prototype, transfer knowledge, and now we're transferring the public good to be deployed operationally. And in terms of the blockchain that we are using, just wanted to mention that across these 3 years, we have been testing with different blockchains. So starting with Ethereum, Hyperledger, blockchain as a software with Kaleido, and the last public blockchain that we tested with was Shia Network. And so we don't favor technologies over the others. We are always open to work with the most innovators in the field and make sure that we capture lessons learned and feedback. And happy to discuss more on the role of blockchain in this initiative.
Cool. Maybe we could just explore a little bit why blockchain. You obviously identified pretty early on in the project lifecycle that blockchain was a relevant technology, but perhaps you could just expand on why blockchain is adding value in this use case.
Okay. So basically, when we started designing the concept and the framework of the Climate Warehouse 3 years ago, our team conducted with a consortium of experts a technical assessment looking at what would be the most relevant and appropriate technologies to support this infrastructure. And all these assessments are captured in a report that I recommend looking at. It's called Blockchain and Emerging Technologies for Enhancing Post-2020 Carbon Markets. And basically, through this assessment, we were looking at specific metric principles. The first one, technologies that support market integrity and environmental integrity. meaning that the capital is allocated effectively, meaning that we are providing a comparability of the value of mitigation outcomes. We also looked at inclusiveness. Is it facilitating and encouraging other jurisdictions and enhance international cooperation? And finally, transaction costs. Are we reducing the transaction costs with this infrastructure? And so we looked at how blockchain-enabled distributed ledgers are providing this robust rule implementation via the smart contracts that can deal and address this wide range of regulation standards and then provide this accountability and transactional efficiency, which is what is required by regulators, investors, and others. So at the end, looking at the functionalities of blockchain technology that can support transactions of all types of emission-related data, it provides a consensus mechanism that it doesn't rely on a dominating entity, but in a peer-to-peer validation network. And finally, it also accommodates data that can be automatically or manually entered. That seemed to be an optimal technology to be supporting the mission of this initiative.
Excellent. Maybe Alasdair, do you want to talk a little bit about the next phase and the operationalization of the climate warehouse?
Certainly. So as Gemma has identified, the World Bank has done a great deal of work to develop the climate warehouse to where we are today. And we're going through a process of handover. That means effectively we're going to incorporate a new entity in Singapore, which we're in the process of doing in partnership with the government of Singapore, AITA, and the World Bank. Having gone through a governance process, we're establishing an interim council, which we made up of 8 national representatives, 3 representatives from the independent standards, and then 2 market participants. We're also in the process of establishing a user forum, and we're receiving nominations for people who have an interest in participating in that, as well as a technical forum which will channel user feedback towards the interim council to decide the future iterations and development of the climate warehouse going forward.
Which does lead me into my next question, is around how you envisage the sort of the broader carbon ecosystem interacting with the climate warehouse.
So the way that we envision the launch phase at the moment is we're working with the independent standards and national registries to have an agreement with them that they will be providing data into the climate warehouse. And so we'll be perhaps announcing that around COP. With the idea to be operational in Q1 of next year. Beyond that, we're going to start working with user forums, so working with market participants, the exchanges, financial institutions, project developers, etc., to provide them access to the data. And I think Chainlink is playing a vital role in providing that kind of API linkage between data in the climate warehouse to market participants.
Right. So maybe sort of building on that, sort of how, maybe you can talk about, obviously, the carbon ecosystem is building on a lot of different blockchain platforms. Can you just talk a little bit about the role of interoperability in terms of the success of the climate warehouse?
Certainly. I mean, if we look historically, all the independent registries run on a SQL database. Over the last few months and years, we've seen a number of announcements around on-chain registries that have been launched, and your previous panel identified some of the more notable startups that are in the space. And as we launch and we go from effectively 30 independent registries to, I have no idea where it'll go, but potentially upwards of 100 independent registries that are all on-chain, the idea of interoperability and this kind of transparency is obviously key.
Right. Anything to add to that, Gemma?
No, just adding that from the beginning, when we were building this infrastructure, I didn't mention it in the beginning, but basically we work in an agenda of an end-to-end digital ecosystem for carbon markets, building this open source infrastructure that is connecting the dots and improving the reporting mechanisms, enhancing the transparency. And one of the key principles is interoperability. So we always had in mind the interoperability as one of the most important criteria, to be not locked in one system and anticipating that there will be many other IT providers and innovators that will bring added value. And so we keep this principle, and handing it over also there's a vision to keep building a roadmap and accommodate new stakeholders as they come.
Right. In the last panel, we talked about a lot of the innovations going on in the market, and what particularly pleases me is the fact that we are seeing so many constituents across this broad ecosystem of the digital MRV data guys, the registry guys, the exchanges, and many of the big Wall Street banks getting involved with tokenization of this asset class. But perhaps you could talk about what innovations do you see that are most exciting coming through, without naming names, but what new use cases facilitated through technology are you most excited about in this market?
So I think at the moment, the focus for most startups is on the tokenization of existing assets. So taking carbon credits that exist within independent registries on a SQL database and then tokenizing them on a public blockchain. I think that's quite an interesting starting point, but what you can do with tokenized carbon credits is in itself fascinating. And as you have this, as Gemma's identified, an on-chain ecosystem, so an end-to-end platform relying on geospatial data, relying on IoT data, that allows you to streamline the entire process of the credit issuance. I think that's probably quite exciting. And then when you look to, okay, how can you tokenize ex-ante credits, so forward issuance of credits, and you can track the life cycle, so from the initial inception of the project all the way until the final retirement, and having a public record of the claims, I think that's probably going to be one of the more exciting innovations that exist.
Gemma?
Yes, and at the end, the vision is that after the core national government registries and independent standards integrate and share their data in this common taxonomy and the data surfaces in a harmonized way, the next phase would be to unleash private sector innovation where other providers can offer secondary services leveraging this data, for example, ratings, forecasting, due diligence checks, compliance reporting, and many others, right? And we had a lot of demand and interest from the private sector during these 3 years of testing and development because they are eager to integrate and use the data. And of course, we have to be a bit patient, but once it's launched and the data is there, it will unlock a lot of innovation and services from the carbon market participants.
Right. So we're obviously seeing this consultation from the large registries currently taking place. In parallel, we are sort of seeing, and we just heard an announcement from Torras of launching a Web3 based registry, carbon registry. To what extent do you envisage the mainstream registries sort of adopting Web3 with the full two-way bridges and interoperability within the next few years? Without naming names, but do you think we will get there with the incumbents, or do you think the new startups will come in and fill that role?
So certainly, all the existing independent standards are actively looking at how blockchain can be deployed and how they can approach tokenization. And I think if you were to ask them, okay, what are the big priorities that you have? One of them probably is, okay, how do we adopt blockchain and the benefits of blockchain? But how do we do it in a way that doesn't impede the success that we've done already? So acting in an abundance of caution is perhaps moving more slowly than certain participants would want. But I think over the next few years, it's likely that we'll see most, if not all, independent standards embracing tokenization and the benefits of blockchain.
Gemma, anything to add?
I think it's a great response.
Right. Okay, so the Climate Warehouse is obviously a really significant initiative in this industry, and I applaud you guys for the work that you've done. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the vision in terms of where next for the warehouse.
Can you repeat the question?
So where next? Where are you taking Climate Warehouse next? The longer term vision, other related initiatives around the.
Right. So basically, what I was mentioning before, we finalized this 3 year of testing and simulation. The infrastructure is now ready to be handed over, and we just completed the handover process that the new entity will be establishing in Singapore. The next steps will be that the registries share their data, which will be surfacing in there, and then the next steps would be to keep working on interoperability, to keep gathering consultations and inputs from the market participants to evolve this infrastructure in a way that meets the demand of the market, especially focusing on the service layer, so secondary services that keep, and we see here in these panels, right, new services, new providers that are providing these emerging technologies to capture data and provide ratings and forecasting services. So that's up to the new entity to decide and in design.
anything to add to that, Alasdair?
Yeah, so I think I'll just say that the climate warehouse will listen to the user group. So the market will, to a certain extent, dictate what they have and what they need. And within kind of certain parameters, the climate warehouse will evolve in line with market growth. We've seen an abundance of startups doing ratings, et cetera, that have specific needs. And I imagine they'll channel their input. Right,
so yeah, obviously empowering the private sector innovation off the back of this open data layer that you've established, that's going to be really, really powerful, as we saw with some of the MRV use cases earlier on. I would just like to thank the panelists and their contribution this afternoon, and highlight, I think there's been considerable public-private collaboration in building the climate warehouse to where it's at to date, and in terms of a lot of the IATA industry engagement, and having been there last week, there was certainly good collaboration across the two. So on that, I'll just thank Gemma and Alasdair, and we'll be around for 5 minutes afterwards if there are any further questions. Thank you.